On my first day at the office, my domineering mother-in-law handed me a mop and coldly ordered me to clean the floor. I refused, calmly reminding her that I had been appointed as a personal advisor, not a cleaner. Her face darkened with anger, and she demanded, "Why won't you follow my orders?" Before I could respond, she flew into a rage and hurled a cup of hot coffee at me, leaving my hand and face burned. I was in shock, writhing in pain and crying from the sheer humiliation. But what shattered me completely was my husband's reaction. Instead of defending me, Liam sided with his mother, shouting at me to stop making a scene. Moments later, he ordered me out of the house. An hour later, I returned with my brother, prepared to deliver a response they would never forget. I can still vividly recall the day I first met Liam. It was during our second year of college, where we were both majoring in finance. Liam was magnetic, with an easy charm and an ambition that mirrored my own. What began as study sessions soon blossomed into a friendship, and before long, we were inseparable. By the time graduation rolled around, we were deeply in love. Marriage felt like the next natural step. I had dreams of carving out my own path in the finance world, but Liam's family had other ideas. His mother, Caroline, was a formidable woman, the kind who commanded the room with her mere presence. She ran their family business in Chicago and left no doubt about her priorities. Control and loyalty were everything. When Liam proposed, I was elated. We moved to Chicago shortly after, and I envisioned a new chapter filled with love and shared goals. At first, everything seemed perfect. Liam was attentive, and while Caroline's demeanor was stern, she remained cordial, at least on the surface. But as the days turned into weeks, the illusion of harmony began to crack. Caroline's sharp comments and subtle critiques made me feel like I could never measure up. "Barbara, you're so modern," she'd say with a patronizing smile, as though my independence and ambitions were flaws rather than strengths. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of Caroline's attempts to assert control over my life. At first, I tried to brush off Caroline's behavior, convincing myself that adjusting to a new family dynamic would take time. But her actions spoke louder than her sharp words. She'd rearrange the kitchen after I had organized it or redo tasks I'd completed, her silent way of telling me I wasn't good enough. What hurt even more was Liam's indifference. "She's just like that," he'd say casually, brushing off her behavior as if it were unchangeable. Still, I clung to hope, believing I could win her over if I proved my worth. I decided to approach Liam about joining their family business, thinking my finance degree and fresh perspective could make a real difference. Liam was hesitant. "You know how my mom is," he warned. "She likes things done her way." "Liam, I just want to help," I insisted. "I want to be part of this family, not just as your wife, but as someone who contributes." After some reluctance, Liam finally agreed. "Fine," he said, though his tone was far from encouraging. "I'll talk to her." The morning of my first day at the office, I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. Excitement bubbled inside me as I arrived, determined to show my value. But the moment I walked in, Caroline's face hardened. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. "I've joined the business," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Oh, really? And what exactly do you think you'll be doing here?" Before I could respond, she cut me off. "You can start by cleaning the office. There's a mop in the closet. You'll find it soon enough." For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. "That's not my job," I said firmly, summoning the courage to stand my ground. "I'm here to work in finance, not as a cleaner." Her face darkened with fury. Without a word, she grabbed a steaming cup of coffee from her desk and hurled it at me. The scalding liquid hit my hand and soaked my blouse. Pain shot through me as I gasped in shock, staring at her in disbelief. "Now clean this up," she sneered, her voice dripping with malice. I looked to Liam, who had been standing nearby, witnessing the entire ordeal. I waited for him to say something, to defend me, to do anything. But he just looked away, avoiding my eyes as though he didn't see what had just happened. That moment shattered something deep inside me. The pain from the burns, the humiliation of her actions, and Liam's silence, it was all too much. Tears streaming down my face, I fled the office, my heart breaking under the weight of betrayal. That night, I packed my belongings with trembling hands. My mind made up. I called my brother Ethan, who lived in New York City. Ethan had always been my anchor, the one person who never wavered in his belief in me. "Ethan," I said, my voice shaky as I held back tears, "I need your help. I can't stay here anymore." "Barbara, what's going on?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. I poured my heart out, recounting every insult, every act of disrespect, and finally, the horrifying moment Caroline threw coffee at me and Liam's devastating silence through it all. By the time I finished, I could hear Ethan's simmering anger on the other end of the line. "Pack your things," he said firmly. "Come to New York. You don't have to go through this alone." And just like that, my path became clear. The life I had envisioned with Liam was gone, replaced by a reality I could no longer ignore. My love for him couldn't survive his betrayal, nor could I stay in a home where I was treated as less than human. It was time to leave and start over. As I boarded the train to New York, a wave of mixed emotions washed over me. I mourned the life I thought I'd have, burned with anger at how I'd been treated, but beneath it all was a growing determination to rebuild and reclaim my self-worth. What I didn't know was that this journey would uncover secrets that would change everything. Leaving Chicago felt like stepping out from under a suffocating weight. When I arrived at Penn Station, Ethan was there waiting for me, his familiar, reassuring smile cutting through my despair. As soon as I saw him, he enveloped me in a warm hug, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. Back at his apartment that evening, we sat down to talk. Ethan, as always, was calm and thoughtful, his protective nature shining through. "Barbara," he said gently, his voice steady but serious. "I'm glad you're here, but we need to talk about what happened." I recounted everything again, reliving the humiliation of Caroline's constant critiques, the coffee incident, and the heartbreak of Liam's silence. As I spoke, Ethan's expression shifted from concern to a simmering anger. "She had no right to treat you like that," he said firmly. "And Liam, he should have stood by you. That kind of betrayal isn't something you should ever tolerate." Hearing Ethan's support felt like a balm to my wounded spirit. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't alone in facing this nightmare. Little did I know Ethan had a plan of his own and it would change everything. "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just the humiliation. There's something more, Ethan. I can feel it. The way Caroline controls everything in the business, the way Liam avoids discussing it. It doesn't add up." Ethan leaned forward, his lawyer instincts sharpening. "What exactly are you saying?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted, my frustration evident. "But I want to find out. If they're hiding something, if they've built their business on lies, I need to expose it." Ethan's expression grew serious. "Then we'll start digging," he said. "But we have to be smart. If they're involved in something illegal, it could get dangerous." In the days that followed, Ethan and I began formulating a plan. He suggested hiring a private investigator, someone with the expertise and discretion to uncover whatever secrets Caroline and Liam might be hiding. Enter Robert, a sharp-eyed investigator with a reputation for uncovering even the most well-concealed truths. "I'll need some time," Robert said when we first met him. "But if there's anything suspicious in their dealings, I'll find it." While Robert started his investigation, I threw myself into my own research. With the skills I had honed during my finance degree, I began analyzing public records, financial statements, and any documentation I could access. It wasn't easy. Caroline and Liam had gone to great lengths to keep their dealings private. Still, I found small cracks, minor discrepancies in reports, unusual transactions that didn't add up. They weren't enough to confirm anything, but they hinted at something bigger beneath the surface. Ethan was my unwavering ally throughout it all. He guided me through the legal complexities, helped me strategize, and kept me grounded when the frustration felt overwhelming. Barbara, he said one evening as I pored over another stack of records, you're doing the right thing. Don't let them intimidate you. Keep going. His words gave me the strength to push forward. Weeks passed, and then one day, the call came. Barbara, Robert said, his tone serious. We need to meet. I found something you'll want to see. When Ethan and I arrived at Robert's office, the seriousness in his expression set the tone. He gestured for us to sit before spreading out the documents he had uncovered. Bank statements, offshore accounts, falsified invoices. It was all there in black and white. The evidence was damning. Caroline and Liam have been running a massive financial fraud operation, Robert explained. They've been embezzling funds, laundering money through shell companies, and evading taxes for years. This isn't small time. It's systemic and deliberate. As I stared at the mountain of evidence, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. Anger at their deceit, sadness for the life I thought I had, and above all, a deep determination to see justice served. But Robert wasn't finished. There's more, he said, his tone grim. It seems Caroline was laying the groundwork to pin the financial irregularities on you, Barbara. She's already started creating a paper trail to implicate you as the fall person. My stomach dropped. Suddenly, everything made sense. The coffee incident, the constant belittling, the relentless attempts to undermine me. They weren't just acts of cruelty. They were calculated moves to set me up as a scapegoat. Ethan reached out and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. We're not going to let that happen, he said, his voice filled with conviction. We'll fight this together. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of activity. Ethan, Robert, and I worked tirelessly to organize the evidence into an airtight case. I pored over the financial documents with a sharp eye, using my expertise to trace the flow of money. Every connection, every fraudulent transaction was meticulously documented in detailed reports that left no room for doubt. As we pieced everything together, one question lingered in my mind. How much had Liam known? Was he an active participant in Caroline's schemes, or had he been another pawn in her web of deceit? I wanted to believe he had been manipulated, but the thought of his silence, his inaction, left me feeling deeply betrayed. One evening, as Ethan and I reviewed the final pieces of the case, he paused and looked at me seriously. Barbara, are you ready for this? He asked. Once we go to the authorities, there's no turning back. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. But I also felt something else, a sense of clarity, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I'm ready, I said firmly. They've taken enough from me. It's time to fight back. The following morning, we submitted the evidence to the federal authorities. The experience was nerve-wracking, but as we handed over the documents, a sense of relief began to take hold. The truth was finally coming to light. As we walked out of the federal building, Ethan turned to me, his voice steady, but full of encouragement. This isn't over yet, he said. But you've already won, Barbara. Standing up for yourself, it takes real courage. His words stayed with me as we walked away. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The fight was far from over, but I wasn't the helpless victim anymore. I was reclaiming my story, and I wasn't going to let Caroline or Liam take that from me. What I didn't realize was that the battle ahead would be even more intense, and the secrets we were about to uncover would leave me shaken to my core. When I decided to hand over the evidence to the authorities, I thought I had crossed the hardest hurdle. But the days that followed proved me wrong. What came next was a whirlwind of revelations, intense confrontations, and emotions I hadn't prepared for. A few days after submitting the evidence, federal investigators contacted Ethan and me. They needed to clarify certain details and confirm the context of the documents we'd shared. I found myself sitting in a sterile, dimly lit room across from two agents, my heart pounding as I answered their questions as clearly and calmly as I could. This is a strong case, one of the agents said, sliding the stack of evidence back toward me. But to make it airtight, we'll need your testimony. Are you willing to testify? Without hesitation, I nodded. Yes, I said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they face justice. The agents began surveilling Caroline and Liam's business activities, gathering additional evidence while keeping us updated. Their advice was clear. Don't let them suspect anything, one agent warned. We need the element of surprise. Pretending nothing had changed was easier said than done. Liam and Caroline tried to reach out to me multiple times, their attempts clearly aimed at gauging whether I was still a threat. Liam's voicemails swung between guilt and anger. Barbara, you can't just walk away like this, one message began, his voice heavy with frustration. Come home and let's talk. But I knew better. His words were hollow. The man who had stood silently as his mother humiliated and plotted against me had lost the right to be heard. There was nothing he could say to undo what he had done, or failed to do. Then, one evening, Robert called with a critical update. His voice, usually calm and measured, carried an urgency that set me on edge. Barbara, he said, I've uncovered something bigger. You and Ethan need to come to my office right away. The next morning, Ethan and I arrived at Robert's office, tension thick in the air. Robert's serious expression made my stomach churn. It's worse than we thought, Robert began, spreading out a fresh set of documents. This isn't just about money laundering and embezzlement. He paused, his gaze steady. They've been involved in smuggling, on an international scale. My mind reeled as I processed his words. Smuggling? That was beyond anything I had imagined. The idea that Caroline and Liam were linked to something so dangerous and far-reaching sent a chill down my spine. Ethan leaned forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. Smuggling what? He asked. Robert pointed to a document outlining shipping records. High-value goods, including art and jewelry, he explained. But there's also evidence pointing to more illicit items, counterfeit currency, and, possibly, weapons. The weight of the revelation settled over me like a lead blanket. What had started as a desperate attempt to uncover the truth about Caroline and Liam's schemes had now spiraled into something far more sinister. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. We'll handle this, he said firmly. We're not backing down now. But as determined as I was to see this through, I couldn't ignore the fear creeping in. If Caroline and Liam were tied to an international smuggling operation, the fight ahead would be far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. Robert handed me a folder thick with damning evidence. Inside were detailed reports, incriminating photographs, and records of illicit transactions, shipping manifests, correspondence with shadowy international figures, and proof of payments tied to smuggling operations. It's not just Caroline and Liam, Robert explained grimly. They're part of a larger network. Their partners are powerful, people who know how to protect themselves. That's why they've been able to operate without consequence for so long. A chill ran down my spine as I flipped through the pages. This wasn't just about exposing Caroline and Liam's crimes. It was about dismantling an entire corrupt network. The stakes were far higher than I had imagined. I looked to Ethan, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay composed. What happens next? Ethan's expression hardened with resolve. We take this to the investigators, he said firmly. But we need to be careful. If Caroline or Liam gets wind of this, they won't hesitate to retaliate. The gravity of the situation settled over me. I knew I couldn't back down, but I also knew the risks had escalated far beyond anything I had anticipated. The following weeks were the most nerve-wracking of my life. Federal agents moved swiftly, preparing for a coordinated raid on Caroline and Liam's business. They gathered the final pieces of evidence, keeping us updated while cautioning us to stay under the radar. During this tense period, Liam made one last desperate attempt to manipulate me. He showed up unannounced at Ethan's apartment. When I opened the door, I froze. Standing there was Liam, his face a strange mix of desperation and anger. Barbara, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. I held my ground, refusing to let his presence intimidate me. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning within me. You don't understand, Liam said, his tone softening as if he could still charm me. My mother. She's not as bad as you think. She's just protective. She didn't mean to hurt you. His words made my blood boil. Not as bad as I think. I snapped. She threw hot coffee at me. She humiliated me. And she's trying to frame me for her crimes. Liam looked away, his jaw tightening as if he couldn't meet my gaze. I didn't know about that, he admitted quietly. But you can't let this go any further. You don't know what you're getting into. His words confirmed what I had suspected all along. Liam had known about the illegal activities, but had chosen to stay silent. Whether out of cowardice or complicity, he had allowed it all to happen. I took a deep breath, my voice unyielding as I stared him down. I'm done with your lies, Liam. You and your mother will have to face the consequences of your actions. For a moment, Liam looked as if he wanted to argue, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for the right words. But whatever fight he had left in him was fleeting. He turned and walked out the door without another word. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, and an unshakable resolve. Liam and Caroline had played their last card. Now it was my turn to fight back. 2 days later, the raid took place. Though I wasn't there to witness it. The federal agents assured us it went off without a hitch. Caroline and Liam were taken into custody on an array of serious charges, including tax evasion, embezzlement, money laundering, and smuggling. The most shocking revelation came during their interrogation. Caroline had gone to extreme lengths to frame me for her financial crimes. She had falsified emails, altered documents, and created an entire paper trail under my name, painting me as the perfect scapegoat. When the investigators explained this to me, I was overcome with a mix of fury and relief. I was furious at the calculated cruelty it took to attempt such a betrayal, but I also felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that we had stopped her in time. As news of the arrest spread, the once mighty empire that Caroline and Liam had built began to collapse. Their business partners scrambled to distance themselves, and the media seized on every salacious detail of their corruption. Caroline and Liam's faces were plastered across every headline, their glamorous facade shattered for all to see. But even as I watched their empire crumble, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life and proving that I wasn't a victim. I had fought back, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Yet, as the dust settled, I realized the battle wasn't entirely over. The scars left by their betrayal lingered, and I knew I'd have to confront them on my own terms. Their arrest sent shockwaves through their once glittering social circles. The media gleefully covered every angle of the story, turning Caroline and Liam into cautionary tales. Their wealth and influence, once so untouchable, were now symbols of corruption and deceit. For me, however, the arrest wasn't a victory to celebrate, it was closure. The weeks that followed were grueling. I was summoned multiple times to provide testimony and clarify evidence, reliving some of the most painful moments of my life in excruciating detail. Sitting across from federal agents, recounting everything, felt like reopening wounds that were only beginning to heal. But I knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about justice for me, it was about ensuring they never hurt anyone else again. The trial was both harrowing and surreal. As I sat in the courtroom, Caroline and Liam refused to meet my gaze. Their lawyers spun a narrative of misunderstanding and hardship, trying to portray them as hardworking businesspeople caught in unfortunate circumstances. But the mountain of evidence, bank records, falsified documents, offshore accounts, left no room for doubt. The moment that hit me the hardest was when Liam took the stand. He looked like a shadow of the man I had once loved, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate, broken demeanor. Under cross-examination, Liam confessed to knowing about the illegal activities. His voice wavered as he claimed he had been coerced by Caroline. "She controls everything," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't know how to stop her. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity. But it was fleeting. Liam had choices. He could have spoken up, could have stood by me when it mattered most. Instead, he had chosen silence and complicity. That was something I could never forgive. As the trial unfolded, I found myself feeling lighter, as though the burden of their betrayal was slowly lifting. The truth was finally out, and though the process was painful, I knew I had done the right thing. Caroline and Liam would face justice, and I was finally free to move forward with my life. The verdict came swiftly, the evidence too overwhelming to ignore. Caroline and Liam were found guilty on multiple charges, including fraud, tax evasion, and smuggling. Caroline received a 25-year prison sentence, while Liam was sentenced to 15 years. Watching them being led away in handcuffs stirred a mix of emotions in me. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was bittersweet relief. After the trial, I found myself in an emotional limbo. I had fought so hard for justice, endured so much pain, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure who I was without the fight. For weeks, I stayed with Ethan, leaning on his unwavering support. One evening, as we sat in his cozy living room, he turned to me and said something that stayed with me. "Barbara," he began gently, "what you've done is nothing short of incredible. You took on people who thought they were untouchable and held them accountable. But now it's time to focus on yourself. What do you want for your future?" His words hit me deeply. I realized I had been so consumed by fighting the past that I hadn't thought about what came next. Bit by bit, I began to rebuild my life. With Ethan's encouragement, I decided to turn my painful experience into something meaningful. I started a financial consulting firm in New York City, focusing on helping small businesses avoid the traps of corruption and mismanagement that had ruined Caroline and Liam's empire. The work was challenging but fulfilling. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something truly my own. But the scars of betrayal lingered. Trust didn't come easily anymore, and I found myself keeping people at arm's length, afraid to let anyone get too close. Still, over time, I found healing. The support of those who truly cared for me, like Ethan, helped me rediscover my sense of worth. One afternoon, as I strolled through Central Park, I paused to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, it had all shaped me into the person I had become. I was stronger now, wiser, and more determined than ever to protect the life I had built. Standing there in the park, with the sun dipping below the horizon, I realized something profound. Caroline and Liam's betrayal had taught me an invaluable lesson: the importance of standing up for myself and refusing to let anyone silence my voice. Life hadn't turned out the way I had envisioned when I married Liam, but in the process, I had found something even more meaningful: a sense of self-worth and independence that no one could ever take away. As I watched the golden light fade into twilight, a quiet peace settled over me. The fight was over, but my story was far from finished. This was my life, and I was just getting started.